Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
All right, let's dive in. Today we're exploring the world of Moth-style storytelling. You know, those raw and vulnerable, true stories told live without notes.
It's such a unique and powerful form of storytelling.
And we're lucky enough to have How to Tell a Story as our guide, straight from the Moth.
It's like having a backstage pass to their secrets.
Exactly. And our mission today is to extract those golden nuggets of wisdom and help you craft compelling stories from your own life. You ready for this?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things the Moth emphasizes is that everyone has a story worth telling. Even those seemingly ordinary experiences, the everyday stuff, can be extraordinary when shared in the right way.
So true. But how do we go from my life is boring to unearthing those hidden gems?
Well, that's where the Moth workshops come in. They're incredible at helping people see their lives through a storyteller's lens, even those who initially feel like they have nothing to share.
It's like magic. What's their secret?
Providing a framework, I think. Prompts and exercises that nudge people to shift their perspective, to realize that even the mundane can be fascinating when framed correctly.
Like that story in the book about the woman who went to an Arkansas-themed cocktail party and ended up revealing a family secret about her great-grandmother's moonshine operation.
Exactly. Who would have thought an Arkansas-themed party could lead to such a fascinating story? It's all about connecting those seemingly random dots and finding the unexpected narratives within our lives.
So we've embraced the idea that everyone has a story, but how do we know which ones are actually worth telling? The ones that will resonate with an audience?
That's the key, isn't it? A good story needs more than just a string of events. It needs structure and transformation. Think of it this way. Struggles and even trauma can be part of the story. They provide context.
The background.
Right, but they shouldn't be the whole story. We're looking for an arc, a change, a shift in perspective, a before and after.
So like that example in the book, the guy who goes to Russia searching for his grandfather's headstone.
Boris Timonovsky, yes. That story has a clear purpose. He's on a quest, facing obstacles.
There are real stakes.
Exactly. And it ultimately leads to a resolution, a sense of closure. Now, compare that with someone telling a story about, let's say, getting their coffee order wrong. It might be funny, even relatable, but...
Where's the arc?
Right. It's missing that transformation. Where's the journey that keeps us, the listeners, engaged? What makes us want to know what happens next?
You're right. It needs that something extra. Which brings us to this idea of stakes. The book really hammers this home, the importance of stakes in storytelling. But what does that actually mean? Why should we, as listeners, care about what's happening in someone else's story?
Stakes are all about that urgency, that thing that makes you lean in and say, oh, what's going to happen next? It's the answer to what's at risk for the storyteller and why should I be invested? Without stakes, it's just a report, not a story. Think about it. You've got personal stakes where relationships are on the line, maybe your sense of self.
Like that speechwriter in the book, Karen Duffin. She forgets the speech right before her CEO's big presentation.
Oh, talk about high stakes. Her reputation, her whole career could be in jeopardy. We feel that tension as listeners.
Absolutely. But stakes can be other things too, right? Like professional stakes. Someone's livelihood is on the line. Or even bigger, societal stakes, where the story touches on those larger issues that impact us all.
Exactly. The key is to make those stakes crystal clear to the listener. Show them why they should care. Now you've got me thinking. What kind of stakes could you explore in your own stories? What's something that really matters to you? What would make your listeners hold their breath?
That's a good question. It's making me think. Okay, so let's say we've got a story. It's got a clear arc. The stakes are high. But how do we bring it to life, you know? How do we make it truly captivating for the listener?
Now we're getting to the good stuff.
Yeah.
The book talks about the power of scenes, right? It's not just about telling, it's about showing.
So instead of saying, I got my ears pierced, you'd describe the whole scene.
Like Esther Nkumbi does in the book. Remember her story about the ear-piercing ritual in Kenya? He takes us right there. We see the young girl, the needle, the thread. We feel the anticipation, the pain. We understand the cultural weight of it all.
It's so much more immersive than just stating the facts. And I'm thinking of Trina's story about the goldenrod field, a beautiful place with this really dark history. She could have just described it, but she uses all those sensory details, the color, the sunlight, to create this contrast with her own emotional struggle.
That's the power of scenes. They make us feel like we're right there experiencing it alongside the storyteller. So I want you to think about a moment from one of your own potential stories, a key moment. What details can you use to bring that scene to life for the listener? What did you see, hear, smell What was the atmosphere like?
It's like painting a picture with words. So we've got our story, we've set the scene, but now I have a question. How important is it to be a 100% factually accurate in storytelling? Do we have to remember every tiny detail?
That's a great question. And you know what? The Moth doesn't actually stress strict factual accuracy. They talk about essential truth, which is more about capturing the heart of what happened, the emotional core.
So we're allowed to take some creative liberties, condense events, maybe simplify a few details.
Absolutely. Sometimes streamlining things can actually make the story stronger and more impactful, as long as the core message, the essence of the experience, remains true. It's about making sure the story resonates, that it conveys the intended meaning.
That takes a lot of pressure off, right? We don't have to be walking encyclopedias of our own lives.
Exactly. It's more about finding the emotional truth than getting bogged down in the minutia.
Okay. I am loving this. Now, before we get too deep into the weeds, let's talk about something that can really make or break a story. Humor.
Ooh, humor. It's a tricky one, but when it works, it's magic.
Exactly. And I think that's a great place to pick up after a quick break.
Sounds good to me. We'll be back in a flash.
We're back and ready to inject some humor into our stories.
Humor is a powerful tool, but the book warns against forcing it, you know?
Yeah.
It shouldn't feel like you're just trying to be funny or worse, using it as a shield to avoid being vulnerable.
Right. It needs to be genuine, not just some cheesy punchline.
Like in that story about the woman whose son unexpectedly becomes a dad on Drake and Collier.
Yeah.
What's her reaction? You go to Target.
It's hilarious because it's so unexpected, so real. It's not a joke, it's just life.
Exactly. And it's those little moments of humor that can make a story so much more relatable and memorable. But before we move on to actually structuring a story, we should probably talk about the potential emotional weight a story might carry.
You're right. The book emphasizes being mindful about choosing stories that come from a place of deep emotion, maybe even trauma. It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
Absolutely. We're not just sharing stories for entertainment, we're sharing a part of ourselves. And that comes with a certain responsibility.
So how do we know when we're ready to share those more vulnerable stories? Is there a clear sign?
It's tricky. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's a very personal decision. The book talks about preaching from your scars, not your wounds. Have you processed the experience enough to revisit it without feeling overwhelmed? Can you share it with an audience and still feel in control of your emotions?
So it's not about suppressing the emotion. It's more about finding that sweet spot between vulnerability and control.
Exactly. The book actually mentions a storyteller who would need a nap after each rehearsal because the story was so draining. It's a reminder that reliving those moments can take a toll, so it's important to respect your own boundaries.
And if you're not ready to share, that's perfectly okay.
Absolutely. There's no pressure. And you know what's fascinating? The act of shaping your story, finding a narrative, can actually be incredibly therapeutic. It's like you're taking control of the experience and turning it into something you can share, you can help others understand.
Like Damien Eccles, the guy who was wrongly convicted, spent years on death row. The book mentions how telling his story, even just practicing it, seemed to help him heal.
Wow, that's powerful. So let's say you've got a story you're ready to share. How do we actually structure it in a way that keeps people engaged?
Right. Because a good story is more than just a random collection of events. There needs to be a clear arc. A beginning, a middle, and an end.
Exactly. Who were you at the beginning of the story, and how did you change by the end? What happened that triggered that transformation? The structure should highlight that evolution. It's like taking the listener on a journey with you.
Like Chandrai Kumanika, the hip-hop star. His story takes us through his rise to fame, his struggles, and ultimately his transformation. It's a real roller coaster.
Exactly. It's not just a timeline of events. It's about how those events shaped him as a person. And there are so many ways to structure that journey. Chronologically, using flashbacks, even starting with the ending.
Wait, starting with the ending, isn't that giving away the surprise?
It can be, but it can also be super effective. Remember Susie Ronson's story about cutting David Bowie's hair? If we knew from the beginning that she became this iconic stylist, it wouldn't be as captivating. The mystery is part of the fun.
Oh, that's a good point. It creates that intrigue. And we're discovering her journey right alongside her.
Or how about Ebony Couch's story about escaping war-torn Sudan? He starts and ends with the same phrase, "Let's go home." But the meaning has completely changed by the end. It's like this full circle moment that's packed with emotion.
That That's so clever. Okay, I'm seeing how structure can really elevate a story.
It's all about those moments of impact, those connections you make with the listener. But here's something that a lot of people struggle with, even experienced storytellers. It's what the book calls the and then syndrome.
Oh, I've totally been guilty of that. Just listing off events without really digging into the emotions.
It's like reading a boring history textbook instead of experiencing a story, right? So how do we avoid that?
The book suggests finding a smaller story within the larger events, a narrative thread that weaves through and gives the story a sense of purpose.
It's like finding that one specific detail, that moment, that symbol that encapsulates the whole experience. Instead of saying, I went through a tough divorce, maybe you talk about the day you split up your record collection, or the moment you realized you could finally sleep through the night without crying. It's those little things that pack a punch.
I love that. Zooming in on those details that reveal the true heart of the story.
Because even in stories about huge life events, it's often those smaller, more intimate moments that really resonate with people. They make the story feel real, relatable.
Okay, so we've found our thread, we've got our structure, we're ready to share our story with the world. Any advice on the actual delivery, What makes a good storyteller truly captivating?
Authenticity. Moth storytelling isn't about acting or putting on a show. It's about being yourself, letting your personality shine through.
So no need for fake accents or dramatic pauses.
Nope, just be you. The more genuine you are, the more people will connect with your story.
The book also talks about things like pacing, pauses, eye contact. It's not just about the words, it's how you deliver them.
It's like the difference between reading a script and having a conversation. We want to engage the audience, make them feel like they're a part of the experience.
There needs to be that connection, right? Speaking of connection, what about nerves? Everyone gets nervous before telling a story, especially on stage.
Oh, absolutely. Even seasoned storytellers get butterflies. The key is not letting those nerves control you. The book suggests things like breathing exercises, visualizing yourself doing well, even just accepting those nerves as part of the process.
It's like they're a sign that you care, that you're about to do something meaningful.
Exactly. And remember, the audience wants you to succeed. They're on your side. They want to hear your story. Because we've covered a lot today, finding your story, structuring it, delivering it with authenticity. But before we wrap up, there's one more crucial element we need to address: the ethics of storytelling.
Ethics in storytelling. Now, that's something I haven't really considered before.
It's a really important aspect, especially when we're dealing with true personal stories. The Moth has these guidelines they call the 7 Principles of Ethical Storytelling.
7 principles, huh? What are they all about?
Well, they cover things like honesty and respect, making sure you're not misrepresenting yourself or others.
So kind of like a code of conduct for storytellers. Makes sense.
Exactly. They also emphasize the importance of obtaining consent if you're sharing a story that involves other people.
Oh, that's a good point. We don't want to be airing anyone's dirty laundry without their permission.
Right. And it's not just about legal consent. It's about being sensitive and respectful of the people in your story.
So before you spill all the beans about your crazy family vacation, maybe check with your family first.
Exactly. And the principles also touch on the impact your story might have on others. Are you potentially harming someone with your story?
That's a heavy one. It's like the old saying, think before you speak, but in this case, it's think before you share.
Precisely. And finally, they encourage storytellers to be mindful of their intentions. Are you sharing this story for self-promotion or to genuinely connect with others?
So it's not just about getting up on stage and basking in the spotlight. It's about something deeper.
Exactly. It's about sharing your story authentically, with a sense of purpose and respect. And you know what? The Moth even has a whole section in the book about dealing with difficult feedback. Because let's face it, not everyone is going to love your story.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like anything you put out into the world, you're opening yourself up to criticism.
And that can be tough. But the book offers some really helpful advice on how to handle those negative reactions with grace and even learn from them.
So it's not about being defensive, it's about listening and understanding.
Exactly. It's all part of the growth process as a storyteller.
Well, I'm feeling a lot more equipped to navigate this whole storytelling thing now, thanks to the Moth and their incredible book, How to Tell a Story.
Me too. It's like they've given us this treasure map to the stories within ourselves.
And now it's up to us to go out and explore those stories, craft them, share them, and maybe even change the world, one story at a time.
That's the beauty of it. Stories have this incredible power to connect us, to inspire us, to make us think and feel. And who knows? Maybe your story will be the one that sparks a movement or changes someone's life.
That's a powerful thought. So to all our listeners out there and tell your stories. The world is waiting to hear them.
Happy storytelling, everyone.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Moth-style storytelling. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.